All right, people, let's do some Gauss-Jordan elimination. So what we're going to do is use our elementary row operations to change an augmented matrix into a reduced row echelon form matrix. And so there is kind of a systematic way that we'd like to do this. So first, we're going to take the system of equations that we're given and write it as an augmented matrix. And now, the first thing I'd like to do is have a leading one in the top left corner, right? And so there's a couple of different ways that I could do that. The first way I could do that is just multiply the whole first row by the number 1/4. That'll turn that 4 into a 1, but it'll cost us a little bit by making there be some fractions hanging around here. And I don't really know if I want to do that just yet. So notice that I do have one other option here. I have a coefficient of 1 in the second row first column of this matrix. So if I interchanged the first two rows, then I would have that 1 above, and I would have the leading one that I want. So I'm going to do that because it brings about fewer fractions at the beginning here. So if I interchange rows 1 and 2, I'm left with this new matrix that has its first row is 1, 8, and -13. And its second row is 4, -5, and 22. Okay, and so we're going to kind of work column by column here when we do this Gauss-Jordan elimination. So now that I have a leading 1 in my first column, I would like everything else in that column to be a 0. In particular, this number 4 down here, I would like to get rid of that. I would like it to be a 0, okay? And so what I can do is I can take the second row and add to it -4 times the first row. And so if I do that, this 4 becomes, well, if we add -4 times 1 to 4, we'll get 0. Okay. Now let's say we start with -5 and we add to that -4 times 8. That becomes -5 plus -32, which is -37. And then we have to do it to every piece here. So we'll take 22 and we'll add to that -4 times -13. And when we add that to 22, we get 74. Okay. So now we've taken care of the first column. That looks great. So now we'll move to the second column, and I'd like to sort of rinse repeat. So at this point, interchanging rows is probably not a good idea because that will upset this one that I wanted right up here in this top left corner. So I'm going to probably do the rest of my operations by just multiplying a row by a single number or adding a number to adding a multiple of one row to another. Okay, so notice that in the second column, I would like to have a leading 1. And that leading 1, of course, it needs to sit in the, so actually it's the second row that I want the leading 1 in. And it needs to be, to the right of the leading 1 above it. So it really has just one chance. It needs to be right here, right? I'd like this number -37 to be the number 1 instead. And so, well, how can I do that? I really got only one way that I can do that now. I can multiply this whole row by the number -1/37. Okay. And so if I do that, the first row will stay the same. And now -1/37 times 0 doesn't change that because anything times 0 is still 0. So that's good. But then -1 times 37, -1/37, sorry, times the number -37 equals to 1. Beautiful. Love it. Okay, and then don't forget to do it on the other side, too. That -1/37 times 74 gives us -2. All right. So now I've got my appropriate leading 1 in the second row here. And so to take care of the rest of this second column, I need the number above it, this 1, to be 0. And so again, I'm going to affect that by adding a multiple of now the second row back to the first row. So it looks like if I add -8 times the second row back to the first row, this 8 will become a 0 up here. So Before we do that, though, we've got to worry about what's going on back here, right? I don't want to disrupt what's going on back here already because that was so nice. So let's see what's going on. If I take this number 1 and add to it -8 times 0. Well, luckily, -8 times 0 is 0. So if I add that to the number 1, I just get 1 back, which is great. Okay, I haven't disrupted this leading 1 that I worked so hard to get. Okay, so now we'll go to the next column here, and we'll add, we'll take this number 8 and add to it -8 times 1 that sits below it. And that gives us 0, which is exactly what we want, right? Okay, and then we'll do it in the third column here. We'll take this number -13 and we'll add to that -8 times -2. So -13 plus 16 gives us the number 3. All right, and look at this. Now we've got a matrix that is in reduced row echelon form, and we can read off the sort of system of equations that we get from this guy. It is x equals to 3 and y equals to -2. So that is the solution to this system of equations. If you start up here, notice that you can plug in x equals to 3 and y equals to -2, and you will get exactly the solution to this system of equations. You might also, just in the comfort of your own home, maybe solve this system of equations by perhaps substitution, and you'll get exactly this same solution. So I'll say that, you might think that solving by substitution is maybe a little bit easier in this case of a 2x2 system of equations. And I don't know if I disagree with that. I think it is probably generally easier to just use substitution. But this matrix method is kind of a good way to sort of stretch our brain at the end of the term. Okay, so that being said, let's do another one. We start here with this system of equations. 3x plus y equals to -22, and 7y minus 5x equals to 8. Well, note here they wrote the second equation kind of out of order. We'd like to sort of do our bookkeeping right. So we're going to put -5x plus 7y equals to 80 instead. That way we can keep everything straight when we make our matrix and remove the variables from the sort of decoration. So our matrix becomes 3, 1, and -22 for the first row, and -5, 7, and 80 for the second row. Okay, and so we'll follow the same kind of game again. I'd like this top left corner entry to be a 1. And now there's really no clever interchanging I can do, so I'll just go forth and multiply this whole first row by 1/3. That gives me 1 in the first entry, 1/3 in the second entry, and -22/3 in the third entry. Yeah, so we've got a little bit of fractions floating around now, which is maybe not our favorite thing to deal with, but we'll deal with it. So now that we've got our leading 1 in the first row, we would like to remove the number below it. Or make the number below it equal to 0. And so what we can do is add 5 times the first row to the second row. So we'll replace the second row with what we get when we take the second row and add 5 times the first row to it. So that will give us, in the first entry of the second row, we'll have -5 plus 5 times 1, that is 0. Okay. In the second column of the second row, we'll have the number 7 plus 5 times 1/3. That will give us 26/3. Okay. And in the last one, we will take the number 80, and we will add to that 5 times -22/3. And that will give us 130/3. Okay, so now we've got the first column squared away, and so we can go and worry about the next column. And in there, I'd like to have a leading 1 right here in this second row, second column entry. And so what I can do is multiply this whole row by the reciprocal of this fraction, 26/3, and that will turn that number into 1, and it will also make this number no longer a fraction. So that'll be nice. So if I do that, multiplying 0 by 3/26 gives me still 0. but then multiplying 26 over 3 by 3 over 26 gives me 1. And multiplying 130 over 3 by 3 over 26 gives me 5. Very nice. So now we're almost done here. We'd just like to take the leading one that we have in the second row, and we'd like the number above it to be a 0. And so how can we do that? Well, we can add minus 1/3 times the second row to the first row. And if we do that, notice again, we won't disrupt the leading one in the first row that we already made, because when we take 1 and we add to it minus 1/3 times 0, we get, well, just 1 plus 0, and that's just 1. Ah, very nice. So what's really going to, where the action's kind of really going to start here, is where we take the number 1/3 and we add to that minus 1/3 times 1. Well, that makes that number 1 minus 1/3, which is 0. Okay? And then in the last column here, we will take the number minus 22 over 3 and add to that minus 1/3 times 5. And when we do that, we end up with the nice number minus 9. All right, and so we've got now that we've got reduced row echelon form now, which is great. So now we can read off the solution. We've got x equals to minus 9 and y equals to 5. Very nice. And again, if you wanted to maybe solve this one by substitution or something to make sure that this answer is correct, you might find substitution to be maybe a little bit more straightforward. But again, we're getting some good practice here. And so if you want some really good practice, you can take this system of 3 equations in 3 variables and solve it using Gauss-Jordan elimination, where you do the same procedure above, you just work one column at a time, getting leading one and everywhere else zeros, leading one and everywhere else zeros, and then leading one and everywhere else zeros. And that will end you with the solution to this guy. And so you can do this one for our final bonus homework of the semester. But I'd like you to really do it seriously and write out each step and state exactly what operation you did to get between each step. So awesome. So have fun with that one. It should be a pretty good exercise for you to get real strong at this matrix manipulation that we're doing. All right. So that concludes this talk for today. So we'll see you next time.